Tiffany, who is at the Drupal board. And Drupal is a certified digital public goods, and it powers digital public infrastructure across the world. You will see it in government websites, public health portals, open data, and education systems. So for almost 25 years, Drupal has been built and maintained by a global community of tens of thousands of contributors, and it's really used across the entire world. So as someone who has been involved in the Drupal project for a long time, Tiffany, what can we learn from Drupal for digital cooperation on DPI?
Thank you so much for having me. I think that Drupal does have some unique lessons to share. So it is one of the most widely adopted web platforms in the government sector and one of the very few, perhaps only, across enterprise. And, as Moritz just said, Drupal is 25 years old, and yet we're still at the forefront of interoperability, of AI orchestration, and innovating every day. So what's incredible is at a time when many projects are being sunset, Drupal's still growing at 10% per year. So I think that's pretty incredible. It's used daily by millions, and it's built by thousands of contributors even still today. So those contributors are both individuals as well as organizations, most of whom are outside the US. So we have as Moritz mentioned, there's the Drupal Association, which is actually a pretty small 501c3 in the US, even though the majority of the services we provide are to those outside of the US. I think that our continued resilience and expansion are rooted in the very deliberate and thoughtful strategies and co-creation practices that I think provide a very valuable framework for understanding how you might think about cross-border digital cooperation in line with the UN's Global Digital Compact. So I think there's three main areas where Drupal's been a little bit different, and I think it's really helped drive our success in terms of our cross-border collaboration. The first is we have very transparent, very inclusive, and very accountable governance. So leadership in Drupal has always been open to anyone. It is jokingly referred to as herding cats, which may be familiar to anyone who works in open source or those who may work in international relations. But we've made this very deliberate effort to create our leadership and our governance structures that are distributed, that are open, and that are participatory. So whether we're talking about these technical leads or initiative coordinators or security teams, they're transparently structured and they are available to anyone who wants to participate. There's no pay to play in either the project or the Drupal Association. Leadership is earned through your participation, it is shared through our governance, and it is sustained through that kind of collaboration. The Drupal Association then acts as a steward. We foster that kind of infrastructure and the collaboration and the funding for the benefit of all. Our sole mission is to advance Drupal with our community as a high-impact digital public good in service of a vision of the web that is open, inclusive, and innovative. I think the second point, and this goes to what Vilas said earlier, is that we've invested in a collaboration tooling. Initially because it didn't exist and you couldn't have it as a SaaS solution, but those decisions that we made really shaped the outcomes and reflected Drupal's values. We've invested heavily over the years in several iterations of collaboration tools that make participation feasible, effective, and seen. So the way we structure our issue queues, the way we structure our contribution is done in a way that reduces friction. It helps distribute the workload among contributors and accelerates learning and mentorship. It's easy to start getting involved. It's easy to participate in ways that match the norms that the community expects. We have multilingual support, we have automated testing, we have comprehensive contribution tracking that makes sure that the participation that you provide is accessible and rewarding for those who are contributing. And we also have a very unique contribution recognition system that publicly acknowledges both code and non-code contributions for individuals and organizations. That allows us to increase our engagement and our community cohesion, as well as incentivizing our service provider ecosystem to donate back. And I think the third way that lesson to learn from Drupal is really about how we structure our norms. It's often said that you come for the code and you stay for the community in Drupal. And I think that has lent itself to the stickiness that those of us who participate in Drupal have felt over the years. We have norms not just about how we work, but we have norms about how we decide when we disagree. And I think that that's super important. We cultivate those norms actively. And so while certainly coding standards and other data standards are table stakes when you're talking about interoperable software, I think looking at the fact that we have a very clear code of conduct that sets behavioral expectations, but it's also supported by a dedicated community working group that ensures that conflicts and international misunderstandings are managed respectfully and culturally appropriately. This intentional cultural design has created a super resilient, inclusive community that enables cooperation across our time zones, languages, and cultures. We have over 150 countries represented in Drupal today. That's huge. And so Drupal is definitely thriving as a very secure and trusted tool, but we also face significant challenges that I think are important to keep in mind as you start to invest in open source tools and digital public infrastructure. Securing adequate funding to sustain that infrastructure that makes Drupal possible is a continuous challenge. Funding constraints are the most challenging aspect of maintaining an open source project at this kind of global scale. Everyone wants to fund the things that are new, the things that are shiny, and just maintaining the funding for what you already have is a little bit like ocean swimming. You've got to do a lot of work just to stay in the same spot. And so making sure that you plan for that as you're rolling this out, I think is important. So, I think in Drupal, even though it's widely adopted by international and national governments, higher education institutions, NGOs, and enterprise organizations in the private sector, none of our funding actually comes from those end users. In many cases, they can't. There are legal and bureaucratic structures that don't allow those organizations and institutions to fund it. And then there's also just the fundamental structure that we are US-based, and most of our participation comes from outside the US. So thinking about how to solve those critical problems of international funding coordination, I think, is key to making sure that any of these kind of open source solutions that you're investing in that become critical components of DPI are able to be resilient and maintained in the long term.